when we say Ohlone, it is specific because it is geographical, but there's different tribes. So just because you know Lonis or get permission in the East Bay doesn't mean that you necessarily have permission in Yalamu or somewhere further south or somewhere further north. So I just want to say that. Kanyon, do you have anything to add?
Well, there are 8 language dialects in what is considered Ohlone territory. And within there were over 60 villages. That means we have our own civil governing structures, our own communities to maintain. Yet there is one amazing lesson about Ohlone peoples in Ohlone territory, is that we all have been taught that we are to be good stewards of the earth. We need to have a humble, accountable, reciprocal relationship with the earth. And even though not as there are more Ohlone people here in California, however, many of our community members aren't able to stay and live on their homelands because of colonization and the forced erasure with genocide, with slavery, with forced extraction, forced baptism, just due to colonization. So there are probably in excess of 10,000 Ohlone peoples. However, some of our community are just coming back, reconnecting to culture. And so it's important that we acknowledge that Native peoples are still here. And many of us have been deeply impacted by colonization. Yet one fair thing to say about Indigenous peoples is connection to the earth and connection to our ancestors, even if we've been ripped away. So I just wanted to point that out, that Ohlone people sometimes are referenced in books as past tense, like they used to be here, or they only showed up here 5,000 years ago, or the books would say, oh, y'all came from the Bering Strait theory. No, we've always been from this land, and many other Indigenous cultures in the Americas also have their origin stories to the land. So when we speak with Western settler colonial mindsets and utilizing science to try and undermine self-determination and sovereignty, it doesn't go well. So offer a little bit, but thank you. Yeah, Ohlone territory is a misnomer and a correct term at the same exact time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think for people that maybe didn't grow up like us in California, going through the education system. So regardless of whether you went to a private school or a public school, especially in the 80s and 90s or previous to that, by 4th grade, there's the mission projects that are actually a requirement in California education. And you're supposed to do a mission project, and to whatever extent the teacher is forcing you to do it as. And basically what is taught, like Kanyon just touched on, is that in schools, they're taught that Ohlone and all California natives have been wiped out, are extinct, they're past tense, and they're no longer living here. And so basically giving rights over to the US for taking over, stealing, resources during the gold rush, and kind of basically saying that that Europeans came, and because they gave, the native Californians God and Jesus, that, somehow we stopped them from being dirty savages. And so the actual history of the slavery, the genocide that was enforced, especially specifically talking about Ohlone, Pomos, and Miwoks in the Bay Area, isn't really taught. And if it is taught, it's barely touched on. And it definitely for sure is not refer to them in the present tense. And I think that's very important, especially when we're talking about land acknowledgement. It's very important when you are trying to move forward in a good way with your organization. And yeah, it's important to keep in mind, Ohlone are still here. Kanyon, we are very privileged to have Kanyon talking as proof that Ohlone are still here. Many of you might actually be neighbors to Ohlone and not even know it. And I think that's a very important mindset to have, especially if you grew up in California, that they're not dead. They're here. Their culture is thriving. Their language is still being spoken. Their dances are still being danced. And then that type of recognition, I feel, is a is really important. Again, kind of how was mentioned before, in reading that, I think Ojibwe reading is, you know, that the land acknowledgement is not a past tense, that it's about moving forward in your connection. And I think in moving forward, one of the things to remember is that all Native people are still here. The Indigenous people of Turtle Island is one of the original names for this continent before white people came. And as Indigenous people, we're still here. And specifically, Ohlonies are still here. And they aren't completely, you know, Catholicized. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But even the ones that are still speaking their language. I know one particular Ohlone, that's Chochenyo Ohlone, that helped to revitalize the Chochenyo Ohlone language, and they are very Catholic, and they're very fine with that, but they're also very culturally and spiritually Ohlone as well. So yeah, that history definitely needs to be in your mindsets, that Ohlonies are not just here living, but their culture is thriving. Yeah. Kanyon?
Yeah,
Is
fighting with my
fighting with my Bluetooth headset. Can you hear me clearly? Thumbs up.
Yes.
Awesome. Apologies. Yeah, and I do want to point out the layers. There are so many layers, especially when it comes to how we identify as intertribal community members. When we mention larger bands, we have community members who can trace their ancestry to Indigenous lineages that were of the original stewards of the territory. Then we can talk about we can talk about Indigenous groups that have created their groups, especially in the 80s, where they started tribal groups to become identified as a group of people seeking or petitioning for federal recognition. And they've been doing that since the 80s. And then there's intertribal politics and different communities that some of the groups may dwindle and some may grow and other ones may pop up. So when it comes to the United States government, it tries to proclaim it desires Indigenous peoples to prove that they are their own sovereign nations. So when Indigenous peoples seek or petition for federal recognition, the US government will say, well, what about those people right over nearby you? They say they are also of your family line, but you do not govern them, or you do not handle those affairs. And instead of groups saying, you know, why do we have to work our tails off to prove who we are? Why don't you work your tail off to prove who we're not? And lateral violence occurs. You can see an example of this with another group of Indigenous peoples of the East. There's a movie called Native America, or American Native, IMDb, and it is a documentary film about Indigenous peoples of the East Coast. One's federally recognized and another is their same family members who did not move during the Trail of Tears, who were petitioning to be a state recognized group so they could build a tribal lodge. And the Native people, who are their cousins who had federal recognitions, were upset with them instead of the government. And so there's intertribal politics. And so there might be large groups. I'll mention a few of the Bay Area. The Muwekma Band, who used to be previously called the Verona Band of Ohlone peoples, Amamutsun, Ohlone Costanoan Esalen Nation, Grayton Rancheria, the Confederated Villages of Grayton Rancheria. That being said, those are large groups that have been petitioning for federal recognition. There's also smaller groups, like my mother's band, the Indian Kanyon Mutsun Band of Costanoan Ohlone people, on the only federally recognized Indian country. There's the Confederated Villages of Lishan in the East Bay, the cousins of the Muwekma Band, in Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone territory, in Huchin or in Berkeley or Oakland territory. And there's also Himrin, an elder who takes care of her family, Ruth Orta, who is also Chochenyo, who works with Karina Gould, who is of the Confederated Villages of Lishan. There's the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone people that happen to be in San Francisco. We have two lineal descendants that can trace their heritage to the Ramaytush speaking territory, and they are doing a lot of work around land acknowledgements on like their website, ramaytush.com. And Awaswas is a community language that doesn't have any tribal group, but Amamutsun tends and stewards land in Awaswas territory. And so there are many groups that are active and we're all doing amazing work. However, there are still occurrences of times that we're still healing. We're still healing 3, 4 waves of genocide. The missions, the occupation of Mexico, the gold rush, where the United States put out $1.4 million in 1853 or 1852, $5 a head, 50 cents a scalp, 25 cents an ear to eradicate the California native. We have John Muir acknowledged to conserve the land. Go look up his name. He wanted to kill all the California Indians. When we think about Indigenous peoples, we were illegal. We had to hide. We had to take our Spaniard baptized names for those who went through the missions and took Mexican Spanish identity to be safe. And now there are these times that people want to be Native, want to acknowledge Indigenous peoples, and we as humans are still healing. We as humans are still trying to navigate the pain. Which one do you think is more painful? The Native person who's been hurt and degraded and not able to speak their language, not able to eat their traditional foods, or the fragile white person saying, the way you spoke to me wasn't articulate enough. You would get more flies with honey than with vinegar. Speak to me better with civility politics. These things happen often. And we have fragility, and we have intergenerational trauma and historical trauma. Both are very valid and both are very true. Non-Indigenous peoples do not know what it's like, nor do they intentionally mean to be disrespectful by the way they inquire. However, sometimes the Western settler mindset is affluent and it's negligent of the sacred. It is divorced from its sense of obligation and responsibility on how it is a community member. So as people, when you encounter Indigenous peoples, you might hear different stories from us. I'm still healing, and I do pride myself as a storyteller. I hope what I convey in the spaces that I get the opportunity to convey them come through. I've seen other Indigenous relatives say some hurtful things towards our own relatives, and it pains me. And I've seen negative occurrences where Indigenous groups exclude other community members. However, we can't replicate the hurt. So with our intentions of being inclusive, don't just find one Native. Don't just say, because we have this well-spoken Native, this person counts for all. I speak for myself, and I might be lucky that I may summarize or invoke or even carry words of my mentors and my elders and my community members, common phrases and sayings that I could laugh about that other people have felt. However, I only speak for myself. And so with my involvement, I want to offer as much information as possible, but there's layers and there's pain there too. So I hope that we can all be kind in acknowledging that all of us have been deeply impacted by colonization. I honestly believe that when non-Indigenous peoples gravitate to ceremony, it's really their own ancestors calling them home. However, we have to be accountable with our actions. We have to be humble and respectful. I'm not a fan of how people cherry pick and commodify culture and ritual and then turn it around and say like they're be all, say all, this is the way it's done. I'm like, where's your humility? So I'm happy to be in this circle, and we may touch topics or subjects that are painful. So that's my kind of disclosure statement. I hope it came through.
No, you did wonderful, Kanyon. Yeah,
Thank you.
something to mention that maybe people don't know, I don't want to assume that people know what we know, is like, so up until 1978, being in the US, being Native, practicing our culture, our spirituality, our religions, our clothing was illegal, absolutely illegal to be us. And so a lot of stuff had to go underground, and that's across the board, all tribes. And even then, there's still policies and things that are in place that are very racist and specific and discriminatory towards Native. One prime example that I'll let you all know is, you know, I'm a dancer. I've been dancing professionally for years and years. Started off in ballet, now more contemporary modern. Now I'm doing Indigenous contemporary, whatever that is. And one thing that I run across the moment that a theater and I'll at pretty much every theater that I performed in San Francisco and in Oakland, I mean, more than that, really, actually internationally, but like the moment they find out that I am Indigenous and that I'm Native, without even the intention like of bringing sage or burning anything, because I'm not going to waste my medicine on white people anyway, but like automatically we get emails, or the person in charge of the theater will come up to us and very harshly let us know that we are not allowed to burn sage and we cannot smudge when they find out that we're going to even do a land acknowledgement, let alone perform, right? So there's one example. Like there's actually no fire code, and then yet there's like other performers that are non-native, non-indigenous, that are lighting candles and doing who knows what the hell else, right? So definitely those procedures are still in there, and that's one example. But I know so many chiefs, California natives, people doing ceremony that are still being fined, that get arrested for doing our dances, holding just normal ceremony, wearing our clothes, because we're a threat, and we've been a threat for a very long time. And people, yeah, people that were alive, you know, previous to 1978 still have that mentality that we're illegal, and because most of their comes from movies and TV, that we're here to start a revolution to kill them, and we're not Dances with Wolves. That's not real. And so I want to say that in 1970, up until 1978, we were illegal. And so now we're fighting to undo those and that mentality and those policies, especially with insurance and in theaters. But also, there is, what a lot of people don't understand is that there is a federal list of recognized tribes, and then there is a list of unfederally recognized tribes, meaning that they have enough treaties that they're going to pretend, at least on paper, to recognize them and give them reservations. And then there's a list of unrecognized tribes that the government says, yeah, you're Indigenous, but we choose not to recognize you. You do not have the same rights as these other tribes. And so for one of my tribes, Yoeme, we are split by the US-Mexican border. We're one of those border tribes. And our traditional territory is from southern Tucson, Arizona, all the way down into Sonora, Mexico. And, you know, traditionally we had villages all up and down. We moved around. There was no like stationary culture for us. And a very small percentage of my tribe is federally recognized and can actually enroll into our tribe. And the only reason why that small percentage can even get federal recognition is because in 1979, after we were then considered legal, we went and got it. We banned together a lawyer and went to DC, and the BIA, Bureau of Indian basically came back to us and said, sorry, we can't recognize you because my tribe is unique. We are one of the only tribes to never be defeated by the US, Mexican, or Spanish governments, because we're literally still fighting for our lives and our culture. They told us, the US cannot recognize you because you have no treaties with us, because you've never lost. So then a small group that could afford the plane ticket flew to DC, and early in the morning started a protest in the middle of a very busy intersection, blocking traffic to politicians and so many people that got upset because they were creating traffic. Then finally our lawyer got a call that, you know, they say, fine, you know, let's negotiate. So then that was our only legal grounding for losing a battle with the US. And so because of that, then we said, cool, our people can get recognition, because at that time we were still having a war with Mexico, and we would be killed on the street just for being Yaqui, for being Yoeme. And this is in the late 70s, early 80s. And so then they sent one representative from the BIA to go through one village, the village of Pascua, which is our reservation. Didn't tell anybody. It was on a Tuesday in the middle of the day, knocked on people's doors, If somebody answered, she wrote down their names, recorded them as 100% blood quantum, and everybody whose names got put on that roster in that one day were the only people that could enroll into our tribes. So a husband at work didn't get recorded, but the wife at home taking care of the baby, both of them got recorded, but the siblings of that baby at school didn't get federally recognized. So their blood quantum, even though they're from the same parents, are less of a blood quantum in that family. So what it did, because my grandpa was working on the railroad, because Yaquis only had 2 jobs that they could do, which was work on the railroad or work in canneries, he wasn't home. So my grandpa couldn't get recognition, but all of his 5 sisters got federal recognition. And so now the government made it so that only the people of those first recorded on that Tuesday and their descendants are the only federal recognized people of my tribe. And it's not even, it's like, I think they said 12% of my tribe is federally recognized. Even though we're culturally recognized and still a part of our culture, we're not. So I want to give that example that Ohlonies don't have the federal recognition. Most California natives do not have. They're on the list of federally unrecognized tribes because they were first, genocide came to them by the Spanish, then Mexico. So by that time, the US basically said, hey, guess what? Like, we don't owe you anything because we weren't the first ones to do it to you. So for those that didn't know that history, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Like when we go to the Phoebe Hearst or the Bancroft Museum, UFO, unidentified funerary object. Oh, archaeologists call Native American history prehistoric. Why can't we use culturally competent and culturally sensitive phrasing like pre-contact, pre-mission period, pre-missionization? Where's that respect or morality or modesty or just accountability, humility? Archaeologists wrote, because they saw an arrowhead that looks like this, because 5,000 years ago in Ohlone territory, we started napping Napa obsidian and Monterey chert into that unique arrowhead. 5,000 years ago is dated both with language and with that occurrence of that tool. Patriarchal archaeological records prioritize tool making as the highlight for development, modern man, tools, Stone Age stuff. And they wrote, I went into a museum and it was a curation for Linda Yamani in Monterey. And I still have this as my group profile pic on Storytellers and Dancers of California. This is a profile group pic on Facebook right now. And it says, no more than 5,000 years ago, the Ohlone people came here to the Bay Area. The archaeologists had such confidence to point out that that unique tool was a symbol of people showing up in the Bay and it was like empty. Had the nerve to say it with confidence instead of humility, like with our understanding or with our observations thus far or with our tools and our resources to study these cultural resources. No, with no humility at all, because if that one sentence was changed, it would show accountability. Just like, studying blood, DNA, crime solving, stuff like that. We didn't have the technology then, and now we do. The confidence that was written erased people. It said, I'm sitting here like, did you know that we have archaeological sites that are being disrupted right now in 2020 that are carbon dated over 9,400 years here in the Bay Area? That means Native peoples have always been here for at least 9,000 years. And then, the Bering Strait theory, you all came from there. Who are you to say? Who are you to say that people can go back and forth and marry and mingle? Because there's actually archaeological data proving that there have been peoples in the Americas and the Southern Americas for more than 130,000 years. But the nerve non-Indigenous peoples have to say, you all came from Africa. You all did this. You don't look Native. Who are they to be a person to say that? And so these behaviors placate mannerisms and interactions. Many books try and say Native American hunter-gatherer. Do you know that diminishes acknowledging us as land managers, as ecologists, as environmentalists, as doctors, as healers, as mathematicians. Have you seen some of those baskets? There are baskets that can catch fish. There are baskets that can hold water. There are patterns and designs. There's chemical reactions to dye, roots. How do you make rope that can carry cinder blocks out of little plants? Thoroughly dismissing traditional ecological knowledge, tech. Dismissing our ability to take care of the ecological diversity by prescribing cultural burns, by managing the land responsively, by considering what does it mean to recognize how our actions and our words impact not only ourselves, the next generations, but the next 7 generations. Thinking about, oh, I might be hungry, but the fish still need to spawn further upriver instead of putting dams up, instead of taking all of that to be greedy for themselves. The same goes for when the acorn drops. You don't take the first drop. You leave those for the critters. You care about all living systems, recognizing the rights of nature. I honestly believe that through acknowledging Indigenous pedagogies and recognizing Indigenous protocol by humbling ourselves with the original peoples and histories of these lands that we have settled on, that we can strategize sustainable futures leaning to Native peoples. But what that involves is a lot of work internally, every one of us, because we have to look at history and the ugliness. We can't dismiss it and sweep it under the rug and say, well, it's not like that anymore. Why have things become the way they become? Why do we do things the way we do it now? And why is it very challenging and hard to see Indigenous peoples in a more cultural context? It's not like we just disappeared. We were systematically removed. So, yeah, sorry to go dark.
Yeah, but tell them, like, because that's. Oh man, I don't know. I assume
I'm
that's
glad
why
we're recording.
is because
Go ahead.
you can get all the fluff all the time, and that's not helpful. I think that's kind of where I'm at now, and like November 2020 is like it's just not helpful to like not. I think it's just a moment where people just need to hear it and listen. If they're not ready, then they're not ready, and I think people need to be honest with that. So thank you, Kanyon. Keep going. Yeah, no, and even and how Kanyon was saying, like the rights of nature and thinking about all of that, and I think also thinking too, like how do you all what's a good way for you all to approach this and be and living your life, because this is not just like, oh, I'm going to work or I'm doing this performance and therefore we're going to think about natives. We're like what we're sharing, this is about you living your life, and then your work then spills out over from that, like that's the overflow, right? And so this is work you have to do internally and definitely as a group as well in an organization, but this is your own internal work that you have to come to grips with and deal with, because no matter what continent your ancestors came from, there's indigeneity that's connected to your ancestors that whenever it was ripped from them. I'm part Spanish on my mom's side, and I know very well that rich history of where my ancestors come from and who they were specifically. And they were horrible colonizers and genocidal maniacs and very terrible people. And even then, Spain used to have indigenous people and indigenous language, but from the Phoenicians to the Greeks to everybody else, they got colonized. So pretty much wherever you were colonized at some point, or at least colonization touched you. Not everybody. There's obviously some people, thankfully, still living on this planet that can still be indigenous and not have to deal with any of this bullshit. But basically, I say all that to give context that as you approach this in your life, as you approach this in your professional life and in this organization, at least this is how I think, and it might change in a few years, it might not. But this is kind of where I've come to how to view things, and this might be helpful to some of you, is not everybody is a colonizer. Some people are. Some people came here, their families came here, and whether they choose to recognize their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, their families came here as colonizers. And even if in their present mentality is not that, oh, I'm colonizing, I'm here to take and change, you're still the momentum and legacy of your family. And unless you're consciously choosing to stop those cycles, you are still a colonizer, even if it's a subconscious choice that was passed down to you. Um, because you're benefiting off of the genocide and poverty of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, and also the displaced indigenous people who were forced here from Africa as slaves. And so that's important to remember. And it's also important to remember that not everybody fits into that category. Some people, and a lot of it has to do with how much melanin you have in your skin. But some people are colonial settlers of this land. For an example, I have a friend that is Tamil from southern India, South Asian, and I don't see them as a colonizer. Their people experienced colonization, and because of that, moving here to Turtle Island was a better opportunity for them and for their family. So they're more of a colonial settler, meaning that they are still benefiting off of the poverty and genocide of Native people, and also of the enforced enslavement of Black people from Africa. But they're not necessarily, their family doesn't have the legacy of colonizer. And then there's this whole other thing, and I'm saying this because I'm working with someone on a dance project, and they're from New York, and they're Black, and they're working with another organization where they had this pre-printed out land acknowledgement for all of their shows, and they had to read it, and they felt really uncomfortable because the language was basically saying that they were colonizers to the House Senosani people. I think I'm butchering that. And that, you know, that there were settlers and all these things, and even not that they disagreed with it, but they felt weird about it. And so then, you know, had this conversation with them. And I also want to have this conversation with you all, is that as far as I'm concerned, Black people whose ancestors were indigenous from Africa and forced here as slaves, those Black people are not colonizers, and they are not settlers. They are displaced indigenous people that have been forced out of their connection to their land, the names of their ancestors. They haven't lost their connection to their ancestors, but the names and the languages and so many of their traditions were forced out of them. And to me, they, in my way of thinking, they belong here now, because I know what it's like to have my land try to be taken from me in some of my tribes. I know what it's like to have my language and the names of my ancestors taken from me, and these other religions and other ways of thinking forced on me. And so I see that in Black Americans, that, you know, a lot of American culture, most of it is attributed to Black people creating this culture. And that's true. They've contributed so much to American culture. And despite having all of their indigenous culture ripped from them, they've been able to rebuild almost a brand new culture that we're benefiting from. So from the way I think, Black people are not in the same category as colonizers or settlers. So I want to put that out there in your way of thinking as well, because when we're talking about Native people, and the indigenous people of Turtle Island, we also have to think about Black Americans. And also too, I have a friend, name is Faith. She was born in Malawi. She immigrated here with her family when she was 10 years old. I don't see her in the same category as Black people like I was just talking about. I see her as an indigenous settler from Malawi. Even if she doesn't necessarily see herself as indigenous Malawi, but she's in a different category than that, because we have to recognize, when we're talking about genocide, when you're doing land acknowledgements and recognizing the rights of nature, recognizing the rights of the indigenous people, we have to recognize all the people of all of us living here, because it's all of our ecosystem together. Right? It doesn't mean I have to change for you or you have to change your culture for me, but we have to recognize our existence and our coexistence together, and how do we move forward in a good way. My people like to say, having a good heart. How do we live with a good heart and see each other as having a good heart? Because we're all born with good hearts. We just get messed up along the way. And so we have to see ourselves with that original heart that we have. So I want to say that for Black people as well, that they're not like everybody else. They're in their own special category. And we got to fight for them too, if you're going to fight for Native people.
Exactly. One elder told me, you need to stop thinking and reacting with here and start being here. Stop living here and start living in here. And beautiful. It's exactly that. And from as simple as I see people rehashing the story. I think I remember hearing it when someone was speaking, but from as simple as you walk into a room. Let's pretend this is a canteen. You walk into a room, set this on the table, and then you're walking around, and I come in, I go, oh my gosh, it's so very important that I acknowledge that this amazing canteen is this person's right here. Look at this beautiful canteen. I bet it makes things cold for a very long time. It's beautiful. It's got these stickers on it. It's wonderful. It's important that I acknowledge that this is their canteen. It's a wonderful canteen. It's important. So important. We all know who this is, right? Right? All right. Let me leave. Let me just walk out of the room with this in hand. It's important that we acknowledge it, right? Let's acknowledge it. Let's acknowledge that something is somebody else's. Let's make sure we acknowledge the names, and let's make sure that the pathways, but
It was so good. I was feeling it.
it's my steering wheel. I was posted. I have it. The connection, the antenna is blocked with the damn steering wheel. But yeah, acknowledgement. What are we doing with that acknowledgement? Are we making considerations about saying, you know what, our business, our strategy, our approach is going to recognize the rights of nature, and we are familiar with UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We follow and acknowledge and support Black Lives Matter. We recognize that slavery is still happening today. Both of our incarcerated relatives, as well as, like, think about the makeup industry, think about blood diamonds, think about all these things that are still ongoing, the shoes being made by children, um, nature being violated, palm oil, all of these issues. And because some people don't see it or don't witness it or don't have an empathetic nerve towards it, they're not doing anything about it. So therefore it doesn't matter. They'd rather be good community members engaging in an economically driven monumentous endeavor of just focusing on getting that little white picket fence. And what are we doing with our lives? Are we caring about anything? Are we just being little consumers? And so is our business engaging in these steps? And we can be forgiving to each other. I can't walk my solid walk. As you saw, I have a plastic bottle. I'm not able to walk my talk. I'm getting closer every day. I'm trying to be there. So I'm not going to bash someone for not doing enough, but are we all taking steps to try and do something? Like, from as simple as we're in the position to make shirts and we make some awesome shirts. And now we're up a tier. Maybe there's the finances to actually go for hemp clothing and hemp inks. And then we take the steps and we're like, oh, we're going to natural dyes and we're teaching our community how to use the natural dyes, and it's ethically and sustainably harvested, and we're supporting indigenous cultures along the way. This feels right. But we can't just jump there and be there now. We have to take steps. And some of those steps are internal, honoring truth and history. How are we grounding ourselves and honoring our ancestors? If we run into walls there and we can't find all of our ancestors, okay, where are we right now? Are we acknowledging truth and history with the land that we stand on? Are we familiar with the indigenous nations and the first stewards of these spaces and places that we call home, we work in, we play in, we travel through? And so these are all steps. These are all individual steps that are ideas. And we can go as fast or slow as we want. I would love it to be faster. I would love us to all start being inspiring beings to inspire more people. And then just like a smile, just like a yawn, it's infectious and more people start doing it. I'd love that. However, we're all taking our time in healing from colonization and slowly, waking up from the matrix of like, what is our future? What is the purpose of all of this? Why do I go to a store to buy gendered products? Why do I consume media that numbs me out? Why do I play video games that numbs me out? Why don't I know what's in season? Why don't I know better ways to get around? I'm bored with like numbing behaviors that keeps us quiet, but some people are okay with it and I'm not going to bash them for it. However, it might be because they don't see it. Have you ever been in a circle Like, let's say San Francisco and Berkeley is quite conscious. I remember being in a mainstream school when carrying leftovers or carrying your own food or your own canteen was strange, was weird, and not wanting styrofoam or things of that behavior. Depending on the circle of people you're with, that one behavior that was strange for the big group for one time is now you're in a circle of conscious-minded community members where none of y'all are using plastic. And it's like, oh, these are the people. Okay. But we're all on that journey, and like one to shame another, we're not getting towards the answer we need. So with love and compassion, with strength and solidarity, with pride and humility, we need to take the steps. And it's with reciprocal, consensual, engaging opportunities. Nothing about us without us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think reciprocal too, right? It's like it's the cultural exchange, and um, I think it's very American. Well, I know it is very American. I think other countries have it too, but it's very American. Is to separate yourself from your parents the moment you're old enough, move out of the house, do your own thing, like barely talk to your grandparents. Like you have no idea. Some people don't even, and not about people who are adopted or anything like that, but like people who choose to, that don't even know their grandparents' names or their great grandparents. I think that's very odd. For me, we have to know on my mom's side 7 generations back. On my dad's side, we have to know our genealogy from like the beginning of time, so it's a very interesting concept. Like we live with the generations, we plan our retirement with the generations in our family. But I say that because you can always reconnect in whatever capacity to who you are, to who your family is. And even if you don't identify because of whatever, that you don't really identify with your family, you can still identify with the legacy of your ancestors, the legacy of your people, the legacy of your own indigeneity, or how you're creating it in yourself. Like I know a lot of trans people that, completely separate themselves for good reason from their very abusive families. And I get that. There's reasons for that. So I'm not really touching on that. But they can still connect to their indigeneity, to who their ancestors were, because not all of their ancestors were abusive like their immediate family, right? I have my father's father was an evil man for years and years. I didn't claim my people because of my grandfather, because he's an idiot. You know what I mean? That's a very understated statement. And being nice, but I really had to realize that, okay, one man can't mess up my connection to my tribe. One man can't mess that up for me, because I am who I am, and I choose to be better, and I choose to heal and end those cycles. Um, so I encourage everyone to connect with who you are, to your indigeneity. My husband is white. He's mostly Swedish, but also British. And it's really fun to watch him connect to his indigeneity and to speak his indigenous language and learn to speak it. And I say that because I want to encourage anybody that feels like maybe lost to their culture or lost to their language. You can find out. I mean, in this age 2020, like those resources are out there. You don't even have to visit a library, right? It's on your phone. And again, it's those baby steps. It's the step every day moving forward. Maybe it's just learning how to say thank you in your indigenous language. Maybe it's just say, so that when you do meet a Native person, or you do see a Black person, or there is a space for cultural exchange, you can actually offer something, not just take and receive. That you can say, hey, I have this from my language. I may not have all the songs, I may not know how to wear all the right clothing, I may not know how to cook the food, but I know how to say thank you, right? I know how to do a welcoming, I know how to introduce myself. And then start from there, and then use that every day. Sometimes for me, I have nobody to speak my language to, because I'm trying to carry like 5 traditional languages, and sometimes I say it to myself. I look myself in the mirror and I say it. Sometimes I wake up, I'll text my cousins to make sure that we're speaking together. You know, for deer are very sacred to my tribe, to the Yaqui people. And being here in Tacoma territory, we're out in the woods, there's so many deer. And just this morning, I was able to speak my language to them. And that's like, it's so meaningful and so impactful that I could share and give, not just receive the medicine from those deer, but today I got to give medicine because I was still speaking my language. Because for me, it's saying that to my ancestors and to myself that we survived and we're still here and I'm still healing, right? And it's huge. It goes a long way. So a good start for all of you is to learn how to say thank you in your languages. Learn how to say thank you. It's so powerful. And then use it every day. Use it every day. It'll feel uncomfortable. You might not be able to pronounce it properly. It doesn't matter. Use it every day. Use it every day because it's for you as much as it is for me and everybody else you come in contact with. That's a medicine, is that language. And also want to say for European languages, you'll get tricked very easily. Spanish, I'm going to say, is not an indigenous language. My ancestors forced that on the Iberian Peninsula. It is not. There are indigenous languages that can still be found out, and you might get one word, but figure out that one word. You know, for English is not an indigenous language. They spoke a dialect of Celtic and I forget, not Druid. It's Celtic. It's a Celtic language, but it's not Celtic. I forget. But French is not an indigenous language. They spoke a form of Gaelic. That's there, and there's so many different dialects. There are, I think, 3 different dialects of indigenous Gaelic that can be spoken. In Africa, they have so many languages and dialects today, but then if you really go far back into history, there's even more languages that are compacted because people have been living on that continent for, you know, millions of years or so, I don't know. Right. And so find out, like, speak the language your grandma and your grandpa spoke and find out that thank you. And then find out what your ancestors, you know, thousands of years ago or centuries ago spoke before people came and made you speak something else. Because that'll help to connect you and that'll help to heal because Kanyon had a good point. It's not just about, it's the reciprocal, right? I have to give and then I have to receive. So yeah, Wailana sang that beautiful, you know, Hawaiian welcoming. And because of that, I feel compelled to share openly. And I want to give that through this cultural exchange. So that's your personal work. And then it's going to come out in your actual work, right? It's going to come out in your movement because maybe your thank you doesn't come out right away in your vocal cords because you have to retrain your tongue, right? Maybe it's actually you first started out to really figure out how to move it in your body because your body is the perfect lump sum of all your ancestors. You're not imperfect. You don't need to be like any other culture. Your body is the perfect lump sum of all your DNA. And that memory is in there. So you can unlock it in yourself and you can figure out through movement how to get comfortable in speaking that. So I want to gift that to you all.
Yeah, it's all a process. It's all an amazing process, and it's both interpersonal and for our own selves, and then for our communities, and then for the earth. Because all of this is just waking us up and reawakening how we can tie in to those tendrils of realigning our responsibility to be a good steward of the earth. How are we taking considerations into how we are being good ancestors in training? Some of us have lost our path, like maybe multiple family generations have lost their path. I just had this conversation in Indian Canyon no more than 2 hours ago with a young Miwok relative and my mother, and we were talking about how many natives had to hide and keeping the sacred secret. And that's why some elders don't like photographs being taken. And there are also other beliefs of like how that photograph can take away, but there's different ways that we are honoring culture, and it's not one method prescribed to all. The beautiful occurrence is culture sharing opportunities. There is not a singular truth. That's what I'm really sad about is when with these kids who are missing opportunities to interact with each other, from as simple as having a sleepover. One kid doesn't get a chance to interface with other kids to see that their household is run differently. Maybe some people take their shoes off before they enter the house. Maybe some people have a form of prayer before a meal. Some kids have to handle a certain amount of chores and other kids may not. Having that opportunity to witness a different culture helps us grow. And when we are in like a monolithic culture or arena, or like a town, like some of those small town politics are can be a monolithic type of way of behaving. When they are not given a chance to be exposed to diverse cultures, the mindset gets ingrained and focused that its truth is the only truth. And when we have that, that's when various problems start to erupt. From as simple as Apaches. I had an Apache sister over on our land, and a rattlesnake almost bit my friend, and I said, "You're way too close to the house." Usually I'll remove them or send them back. But this one seemed to be a strong adult. It probably was very grounded in that area. I'm like, "Sorry, I'm gonna have to take your life. There's too many people coming through here." And she, as an Apache sister, was not going to kill, nor will she consume that snake because snake is sacred medicine. And she volunteered to hold the camera because would not have any physical part. However, she, as a guest on my homelands, respected me and my decision in how I was going to go about, well, saying, "I appreciate the life that you lived and the gifts that you give. I'm sorry to take you from this earth." And I had to eradicate a rattlesnake. However, she did not go down my throat and scream at me saying, "It's not right to do that. This is not our way. This is wrong for my peoples. Our peoples believe this is sacred." No, because she recognized where she was. She was on our homeland. And that humility and that accountability, and even voicing it, she set her boundary saying, "I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to consume it." I respected her and her need. If she even needed to walk away, I'd respect that. I wouldn't force her to stay. And that kind of simple culture sharing opportunity is so very beautiful. And there's things that we don't know and that they come up to the surface. And so I encourage you to learn more. And some natives don't need to talk to you. You're not going to get an instant access. And so just learn what we can. And layers, not just pre-contact history of the lands. Like there are layers. Like when we think about indentured servitude or people seeking a better life, or people brought forcefully, we are all settled on these lands, but we're not not everybody's colonizers. Some people are, some people aren't. Some people have benefited and inherited benefits from this colonial system and this colonial mentality. And sometimes they don't care. They would rather spend money than do the work. It's easier to throw money at something like people who care about the earth who want to be part of the Sierra Club. They don't realize how racism Sierra Club is.
I
So
just
yeah.
want to let everyone know that our time is coming to a close. And if it feels okay with you, Canyon and Snowflake, I'd like to perhaps open it up to the group if there's any questions or comments or anything just for a couple of minutes before we do our closing. So if anyone has something they'd like to share or lift up a question, just to be honest, we have a bunch of questions and we're not gonna go crazy on it. I know I have a ton, but this just feels so good just to listen to you two, and it feels so good to be with you. And I'm so honored to share space with you and for you to come here and share all your mana'o, your thoughts, and your pu'uvai, your heart, and your na'au, your guts with us.
Tlazokamati, Mateo.
Ashel neem dank.
Oh, sorry, Melissa, go ahead. I was just going to say thank you so much. Thank you so much, both of you, for letting us in and for opening up. I really appreciate everything that you've shared. So thank you.
特别感谢你们，谢谢。
Yeah, I also just wanted to say that I feel like so grateful to be here and to learn and for the honesty in the heart. And yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you. I took a lot of notes, but I think one of the ideas that I felt like kept coming up again and again was humility. And I'll happy to share notes. Yeah. Is humility and ideas around being open to the evolution of your own knowledge and your own understanding of yourself and each other. So thank you very much.
Yes, I want to join in with the thank yous and also ask Snowflake, where are you dancing? Where are you doing your blend of indigenous, modern, contemporary work?
Yeah, a few different dance projects right now. One of the biggest ones that I'm working on, I'm working with Keith Hennessy and a few other friends. Right now it's just virtually because we're all in different places, and then also there's not really a place to actually meet. We did actually discuss seeing, because I think the annex, Joe Good Annex, right, opened up a little bit to studio rentals. So I think we were thinking about doing that, but then I don't know, things just got crazier and crazier. So we're just meeting virtually at the moment and just trying to figure out what the hell we're actually going to do, because we got a really nice grant, which is like super exciting. So I've been working with Keith. I would say over the last like couple of years, he and I have been working on different grants and things and different projects. I'm also working, or I used to be affiliated, but still kind of working more in, I guess, I don't know, choreographic, I guess, guidance of Dancing Earth. They're kind of going through something at the moment, but been involved with them largely. But then also just, I also finished a project called Chalk and Yum. And we performed different places. The culmination ended at Counterpulse for the Weaving Spirits Two-Spirit Festival. And that was an Indigenous performance based off of gender and sexuality. And then also have like my own little dance thing that I'm doing. And I have a Dartmouth residency that I was supposed to actually be in person for, but because of COVID, it's also virtual. So I guess my residency is in Oakland and Oregon, but it's supposed to be at Dartmouth. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I just wanted to chime in that Wailana's building's power went out, which is why Wailana dropped off the call. He texted, sorry. So that's where Wailana is. It's a bad, hard time to be on Zoom, I think. Hold on one sec. I'm gonna try to get him the phone number to call in.
Hey Kanyon, I don't know if you remember me, but you were at my lighting design workshop in February. Just wanted to say hi.
Yeah, I was there too.
Oh yeah. Oh, Kanyon left also. Just kidding.
Gigi, are you the one that's a part of the Hive?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, cool. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Nice to see you.
You.
Yeah, were you a part of Plataforma at all?
No, no.
Were we waiting for Wailana to do the closing?
I think we're gonna try to get Wailana back, yeah.
Mm-hmm. How are you all meeting? Just virtually, or are you in person?
Virtually.
Virtually.
How has that been for you? Has it been hard?